things that make a company valuable for a buyer make it valuable for you.
Well, we are back in studio. Good morning, Nick, Adamy. How are you?
Good. How about you, Luke?
I'm doing great.
Awesome.
Yeah, fun to be back. And we're actually recording live in the Mile High City. How's it feel to be back in Colorado?
I wish there was more air.
Yeah, it's a little tougher for people like you who like to go for a run.
Yeah.
You could certainly feel the altitude, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I am here today in this segment representing all business owners on the planet. No, just here in the Mile High City, Grand Rapids, wherever I could be in. I could be in Atlanta, Georgia. I could be in Dallas, Texas right now, right? And if we were talking about business ownership, right? And in the world of valuation, there's something that all of us business owners, we are concerned about, and that is, how do we create value in our companies, right? How do we assess what we have today, right? And how do we prepare ourselves for where we need to be tomorrow? So if I'm sitting here with the expert, in business valuation, and you were to start to talk a little bit about what are some of those value drivers that a business owner should understand and know as they're thinking about their planning for the next 18 months, 2 years, 5 years, what are some of those things?
Luke, I love how you said, it could be Grand Rapids, could be Denver, could be Dallas, because while every business is unique, there's lots of nuances, right? The things that create value, the things that drive value are very universal. So the good news for business owners is what works for one business can actually work for your business too. And it really boils down to three main things. The first is very intuitive, and it's profits and cash flow. So it's as simple as make more money. And obviously, easier said than done, but with a focus on the bottom line, that drives value. Pretty intuitive, probably not earth-shattering news for a business owner. There's two other fundamental factors, though, that drive value that are maybe a little bit less intuitive, less obvious. And the next is reducing risk. And risk comes in a lot of different forms, but the idea here is, what can you do to ensure that those profits remain consistent and growing in the future? The more consistent those profits are, the more you can assure those profits will be there in the future, the more valuable the company is.
So before you go on to number 3, because thank you for number 1, which is obviously very intuitive. We need to have more profits. Cash flow needs to be strong. When we talk about risk, think about some of your past customers and clients in the past. What are maybe a story or two about risk where here was the situation that they were in, and here's what they did to mitigate risk, and it worked? And maybe here's a situation where they decided not to mitigate risk, and here's what happened.
Yeah, so classic example of risk is having all your eggs in one basket. So this would be the supplier that has one main customer, and they take really good care of that one main customer. But if they lose that customer, that's it. And we had a client actually with 80% of their sales with one big automotive manufacturer. And sure enough, there was a quality problem, and they lost the entire account, and 80% of their sales disappeared basically overnight. And the company had to jump through a bunch of hoops, had to lay off a ton of people, had to scramble, and the owners had to put in more capital, a lot more capital, to keep the company afloat, while they desperately scrambled for more business to replace the business they lost. So that would not be a success story. A success story would be the company that had a business model where they were project-based, and revenues were hard to predict because they came in one project at a time. And that company recognized the risk associated with, we do one project, then we don't know where the next one's going to come from. We've been lucky that they keep coming. But they transformed their business into more of almost a subscription model, where they engage with their customers in a different way and created long-term, repeatable, predictable demand. So rather than just have us as a project company that you call when you need something, have us on call, have us on retainer, have us on a subscription where we've got a contract and we'll do everything for you for 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, and we keep renewing that contract. And we've got steady recurring payments for that client service.
Subscription models, obviously, changing it. What I'm hearing you say is that they were in a situation where their revenues were very unpredictable.
That's right.
Right. So they did not know where the next project would come from. And so they could have made $120,000 this month and $30,000 next month. And that's got to be, when you're talking about risk, which is the topic we're on right now, that makes it very difficult to understand maybe even where you're going to make payroll. You know, how you're going to make your payment to the bank for maybe notes and things.
That's right. And for a lot of business owners in that kind of business, say construction or a job shop or something like that, if you're an owner of that kind of business, you're used to that risk. You grew up with that. You're comfortable with it. And for the most part, there's always been another job, or there's been sort of a portfolio effect. We've got 20 different things going on at one time, and there's always something. But for a buyer, for an investor, for an outsider who hasn't grown up with that risk, who doesn't have that same comfort level, they're not going to pay the same price for a company that has that kind of unpredictable revenue as for an identical company whose revenue is predictable.
Right. So have you seen a lot of companies that when they move towards a subscription model, that increases their value X-fold to someone who's a buyer? Or does it even matter for someone who's an investor, someone who wants to put money into a company? Do they look at things like that?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And this is why, so one of the places where we see this would be when private equity buys a company and starts to roll up other smaller companies under that platform. And often we see a shift to a more subscription-based model of revenue because they recognize the value in that. The entrepreneurs maybe who built those businesses, again, didn't have the same concern about risk, but the private equity sponsors understand how valuable it is to smooth out that revenue, to make it more predictable. And so a lot of times you'll see with roll-ups, with private equity investments, one of the things that the private equity sponsors bring in is a lot of discipline around making that revenue model more predictable, more sustainable.
And that is what mitigates the risk. That's what takes down the risk.
That's absolutely right.
Okay, so number one, profitability.
Make money.
Make money. Make more money. Number two, risk. What is that number three?
Yeah. And just to reiterate, number one, make money. Number two, reduce risk, which means
we don't want to increase risk.
Right.
That's true. Yeah.
Reduce risk. So make more money and make that money predictable, solid. So number three this is more subtle. Number three is position the company for growth. And I say it's more subtle because, well, there's a lot of ways to do it. And sometimes it's not as obvious if a company is positioned for growth versus one that isn't. Another interesting aspect of positioning a company for growth is it often is directly at odds with making money today. It costs money. You've got to invest in the future. So an example would be investing in technology. That's expensive. It hurts your profits, or you're investing capital expenditures, which hurt your cash flow. But that's positioning the company for growth in the future. And without that, a company can be very profitable today, but not have a very bright future.
Gotcha. And then do you have any stories about some companies where they did it right, where they actually positioned their company? What type of things did they do? You just gave an example of the IT, like a technological type of investment. What other things have you seen companies do to position themselves for growth?
Yeah, so we get to see a lot of examples of this. I think we're lucky in that our clients are usually successful, dynamic companies, and that's no accident. The companies that are doing things, that are growing, that are making acquisitions, those are the companies that need our services. So, in fact, I was just on a call this morning with a client who did a major acquisition overseas, establishing their footprint in a new market. This was after 2 decades of continuous improvement in their model, honing it. And that would be probably the most effective approach I've seen is an incremental, almost boring approach to continuous improvement. We're going to figure out what works, and we're going to make it a little better, a little better, a little better. And every time we meet with this client, we talk about what's new, what they're focused on, and it becomes clear that whatever they were focused on before, they've mastered. And now they're honing the next thing. But it's not a pivot. It's not a change.
Right.
It's building on what already was working.
Okay. Excellent. So companies that are starting to do these 3 things, when it comes time for whatever the next business transaction is, these are the 3 drivers that can help with business value. Let's finish up with the last area topic here is, what are the reasons why someone would need these type of valuations? I'm guessing one is you're going to get bought. That's got to be one of the reasons. Walk me through all the different reasons why a business owner like myself would want to have a business valuation. There's got to be multiple reasons why.
Sure, and you bring up, a great example, maybe the most intuitive. Hey, I'm thinking about selling my company, and I want a realistic understanding. Nobody wants to believe their baby's ugly, so maybe. And selling your company is a big deal, and it's a huge investment in time, emotion, and expense. And so, if you're going into it unsure, if you're going into it maybe without realistic expectations, you can end up at the end of the line being very disappointed and hanging up the whole process. So one very obvious reason is to have a realistic understanding of what to expect, what's reasonable. From an independent outsider with no dog in the fight. Other reasons are a little bit more, maybe more technical. Anytime someone's doing a transaction in ownership that could be challenged by a third party, that's when it's extremely important to have a rock-solid, independent valuation from a credible expert. So that's where we come in. An example would be a family business passing ownership from one generation to the next, working with their estate planning attorney, navigating all of the tax rules, codes, regulations. In order to support a transaction along those lines, an independent business valuation is absolutely critical.
This has been amazing for me as a business owner. I'm sure other business owners who are listening to this are starting to think about what type of things they need to do in order to drive value in their company, not just for today, but for many years to come, so that when an opportunity comes to, transition to the next generation, sell, buy, whatever type of situation they're going to be in, these are the things they need to be thinking about. Tell us a little bit about Adamy and how can people get a hold of you?
Sure. Well, this is what we do. We figure out what companies are worth. We talked about family transitions and ownership. We work with a lot of family businesses. We are a family business. My dad started the firm back in 1979, and we've been through our own ownership and leadership transition. We've got Midwestern home base, but we work with companies all over the country. And the core of what we do is we help people in transactions where the price could be challenged by a third party, and we make sure there is a rock-solid, independent valuation to stand behind for that transaction.
Yeah, how can people get a hold of you, Nick?
Website's easy, adamyvaluation.com. My email address is there, my phone number's there, and all of our colleagues' information is there. You can contact anybody in the team who can help you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. I know the business owners listening will totally appreciate it. So thanks for coming in today.
Absolutely.